KoitCast. Today is a first for me, with not one guest joining, but two. The first of which is an international best-selling author and researcher who coined the term near-death experience. The second of which is a 5-time New York Times best-selling author, documentarian and filmmaker, and one of the leading voices in the field of consciousness studies. Please give big Koit welcomes to both Dr. Raymond Moody and Paul Perry. And now a quick request from me before the interview begins. Please can I ask you all to subscribe to this channel. It's very important as it helps me to attract new guests and to help this channel grow. Please also like, share the content and also comment on the videos. All these interactions will help my channel grow. Thank you ever so much. And now over to the interview. Hi Raymond, welcome to KoitCast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on, man. I'm just so delighted with this. Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me, actually, and thank you ever so much for coming on. Like I said, just off record a second ago, you're the OG of this research, and so it's fabulous to speak to the main guy in the field. So thank you ever so much for coming.
Well, I say that I am a specialist in guesswork, and but
yeah,
an expert on the unknown and a specialist in the
yeah. I suppose if you think of it that way, who out there could ever be classified as a true specialist on this subject?
I do. However, I think in terms of this area of interest that we have in common here, I think that the main thing that prevents the genuinely rational comprehension of the question of an afterlife is purely psychological at this form, because you know, in the real world, there are logical difficulties with the whole notion of an afterlife, right? It's self-contradictory for one thing. And but what I call the afterlife establishment are people who come up with assumptions which override the logical realities. And so I think that the afterlife research as we have it is a kind of dream world. And so that kind of thing, which is scientism, is the main factor of it. Scientism is the doctrine that scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And it's ingrained. It's less so in Britain or Australia, for example, but here in the United States, it's really ingrained. And its scientific method by that doctrine is the only rational means of securing knowledge, right? Well, as I used to point out to my epistemology students when I was a philosophy professor, that's a self-contradiction to say that. Because think of it this way. Let's say the doctrine, the scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge, right? So I would write that on the board. And I would put a rectangle around it. Well, how do you know that? Well, there's two answers you could give. Well, scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge, and I know that by the scientific method.
Circular argument
in a circle, right? But the other one, scientific method is the only rational means of securing knowledge, and I know that by some other rational means, like philosophy or history or the law, or, you know, that is a self-contradiction, right? So, but in that sense, that doctrine is so enshrined in parapsychology and psychical research, that's why they never get anywhere. The reality is the scientific, that question of life after death is not yet a scientific question because there's no means to verify it, right? And the whole thing about mediums, you know, he told me things that only Uncle Willis knew. I mean, that's baloney. To say to some, you know, the medium told me things about my Uncle Willis that he couldn't possibly have known. That's a self-contradiction, isn't it? But when we perceive that somebody knows something about us that we couldn't possibly know, we feel uncanny. I was on call one night when I was a psychiatry resident, And I loved being in the emergency room because it gives you like, you can get the whole story, listen a long time to the patient, and the stories are so fascinating. But anyway, on this one night, I went in at my appointed hour and I already had 11 patients. So, I'm not going to be able to do my normal, just talk about it. So, first patient, well, I went in and it's a couple in their 50s and they were just worried to death. What's the problem? Well, it's our 30-year-old son. What's the problem? Well, he's just been, he sings all night, he works all night, won't go to sleep. And so normally I would have said, well, let's just, tell me more. But I had 10 other patients to get to. Okay. So I said, well, listen to that. He's talking. He's a lot energetic all night. So I said, has he ever had a psychotic breakdown before? No. And I said, well, so I was thinking 30 is old for the onset of schizophrenia, right? Or except for the normal type, but the paranoid, that's later 35, but it didn't sound delusional. It sounded energetic. And so since he hadn't had a psychotic breakdown before, I was thinking mania, right? And so I said, well, has he been making lots of long distance phone calls? Yeah. Well, what about, has he spent a lot of money? Yeah, he spent $5,000 last week. Well, has he been hypersexual? Oh, his poor girlfriend. And like, what about, has he started wearing jewelry? Yeah. What about a big hat? Is he? Yeah. And see, I suddenly looked into that woman's, and from my point of view, actually, I was saying things about her son that I couldn't possibly have known. So that's baloney to try to prove an afterlife by what somebody allegedly could not possibly have known. But how do we do it? So there are ways, is what I'm saying. This is not negative. By changing our mindset, we can absolutely address the question of an afterlife in a whole new way.
And I look forward to us doing that across humanity, because to get to some
Yeah.
true answers, I know all that we can do is speculate right now, really. I know there's data there, but it's still only a speculation of sorts. If we ever get there, and I hope within my lifetime, I would love that.
I think it's coming about already. If you think about it, how old are you now?
I'm coming up 50, about
50.
weeks away, yeah.
Yeah, it's when I was, see, people knew about near-death experiences in antiquity. Plato wrote about them. Democritus wrote about them. Heraclitus, I think, mentioned. But they were extremely rare because how common was it that somebody who appeared dead would come back to life? Was it, practically
Mm,
nil? But they occurred just once in a while. Then suddenly, in the 60s and then into the 70s, all of a sudden CPR. Now
exactly, yeah.
there's a machine in every department store, right? But this is new. And in the 60s, when this started, then all of a sudden there's this vast wave of people suddenly emerging who have had an experience that had always occurred but was extremely rare beforehand. See, and now it's gotten to the point where I think probably everybody in a Western country probably knows somebody who's been dead and come back. Wouldn't you say? I
I
mean,
would
it's
agree,
just
yeah,
common.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
very,
so
very common.
that means that the afterlife is becoming infused in this life. If everybody knows somebody who's been there, that means that it's coming here. Is
Yeah,
the way
and it
I take
seems to be getting more prevalent, doesn't it? As more people share this
it. Yes.
information out, just like on programs like this, as an example. Right, now, before we jump into the true meat and potatoes of the NDE, I want to know a little bit about yourself, because I'm actually interested also in the paths people take in life, right? And almost like the science of a person, like your
Mm.
before state, you've had an experience, that's you test your result, and then what are the results? So from your
Yeah.
perspective, and personal and career wise, what did you do before studying NDEs?
I what I did before I studied NDEs is what set my interest in it and my way of thinking about it. And because when I was 7 years old, I had already read quite a number of books of astronomy.
Lovely.
And also, when I was 7 years old and 8 years old, my favorite author was Lewis Carroll and Dr. Seuss, who you don't have been written, but
Yeah,
he's
but I'm
well known.
aware
He
of
was
him.
a
Yeah, yeah.
nonsense writer. Yeah, and Edward Lear was another favorite of mine. I just loved those nonsense things when I was a kid. And so, and I was 7 or 8 years old, and I looked through a telescope, and I suddenly realized that, oh my God, this makes no sense because your mind zips out to the wall, right? How big is this, right? Go to the
Mm.
wall. But just a minute here, doesn't there has to be something on the other side of a wall? But that doesn't make any sense either, see? So I realized at 8 years old that this world we're in makes no intelligible sense because if it ends in a wall, what's on the other hand? But then if it can't just not end at all. So, it's nonsense. And that's all right because I love nonsense from Lewis Carroll and Dr. Seuss. And so that then I was not religious. My dad was in World War II as a medic in the Pacific Theater. And he was a professional military officer. You probably know both of those, like a surgeon as he is,
Mm.
and a military officer. He was a tough person. And when I was a kid, he was very sarcastic about religion. In retrospect, as you know, that generation didn't talk much like later generations did.
Hmm.
And I had to figure out later on that his hostility to religion came from um, just what he had seen in World War II and wouldn't talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was my life opening experience, was looking through that telescope and, oh my God, putting it together that this is nonsense we live in. Then, not having any religious background, my only notion of an afterlife came from a Jack Benny movie that my aunt took me to, and from cartoons I'd seen. And I thought it was just a joke, but nobody took seriously the idea there was an afterlife. So I went to the University of Virginia intending to major in astronomy. Was interested in philosophy already, so I took a philosophy course. And in my first few days of college, oh my God, Plato's Republic. Holy mackerel, how have I not found this book? And I was absorbed. And quickly, Plato quickly became my hero, as he still is. And I thought, that this guy takes the question of an afterlife seriously. But that was a startling revelation to me. And because, see, the very way it begins is that Socrates, who's then about 20 years old, meets this old guy about, 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s. And he says, Kephalos, I may get your age someday. What does life look like to you? He says, well, Socrates, I've been very successful in my business, made a lot of money. I earned money from my dad, but I multiplied it. And he said, and I was absorbed in my business. But now he said, recently, it's all these stories I heard about the afterlife when I was a kid are suddenly on my mind. And he started talking. And so that was where I realized, quite,
Mm.
this is an important question. And then at the end of it, there's this near death experience. Then 3 years later, I met Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, who had had such an experience. Years later, quite after my book was published, my dad, who was from Porterdale, Georgia, my mom was too, and George Ritchie was from Richmond, Virginia. And George's experience took place at Camp Berkeley, Texas in December 1943 when he was a recruit in the Army. And George's experience got me to interview all these other people. When I was a philosophy professor, was what I did. And so after my book was published, my dad, it's a long story, but I'd gone up to Charlottesville to do my interview for my psychiatry residency, and I saw Dr. Rich again. And the next night in Georgia, I mentioned to my dad, "Yeah, I was with this guy, this first person I knew who had this story." And by then, my dad had heard a tape of George Ritchie's experience, and my dad said, "Huh, George Ritchie, Camp Barkley, Texas, December 1943. You know, I was there, and so were you." And yes.
Synchronicities,
And
big
my
time.
dad had gone to Camp Barkley in early September to go to officers candidate school. I was conceived in late September. George's experience was December 20th. My mom and dad moved away from Camp Barkley December 29th. So I was there in utero, and it gets even weirder because, it's like George Ritchie just magically materialized in my life. And you wouldn't believe it.
But
But
the
my point
question will
is,
be this, Raymond. The question will
yeah,
be, is that somehow a plan in the universe that makes sure these lives
well,
converge?
I hate to bring in the universe when I'm so, yeah, I don't even know how my little brief segment of it very well. But, but what I would say is, you can't not think that somehow I must have supposed to have been doing this.
Mm.
And that's the only way I can think my way out of it. Well, I mean, there are just so many things like this. When I was a kid, I'm from a law enforcement family. My uncle driving me around in the woods in his cop car saw this old grist mill. Okay, oh, what a great
Hmm.
place to live in. I looked all around for years, no grist mill. I'd surrendered that dream. In 1989, I was doing this research. I needed a place out in the country. I was lecturing at a university. I was a professor at a university. Found out this research I wanted to do. Looked all around in that area for a place to do it, and it was out of my reach. And so the secretary of the psychology department said, "Raymond, if you just go 11 miles across the state line into Alabama, the real estate agent is fine over there. You'll be able to find someplace." I have no sense of direction. So I called a friend of mine who's a real estate agent in Atlanta who was from Alabama originally. "Can you take, yeah, in January of 1990, shows up and she called me. She said, "Can I come by tomorrow? We'll take it." "Yeah, yeah, sure." I had no idea where it was going. My only criterion was that it had to be close enough to the state line I could get back and forth three
Sure.
times a week. And I have no sense of direction anyway. She paid me to this place. The guy who was taking us around was a local sheriff who knew my people in law enforcement. And
Oh,
and
your
he
video's just
had
turned
taken,
off.
oh, hello.
Your camera's just turned off accidentally, I think.
Oh, let's see. I
You
don't know how to do it.
might have
Um,
accidentally clicked it off.
oh my, I don't know how I did it even. Yikes.
It was just magic. I'll send
Yeah.
something to your screen. I've sent
Yeah. Start my video.
yeah, there
Okay.
you go.
There you go. There you go. Let's see.
Let's see if it's on yet.
There you go. Okay. All
There
right.
you go.
Good.
Back
All right.
on.
Good.
Lovely.
Terrific. And so anyway, and so I went saw this little Victorian cottage way out in the country. That's a great place. The sheriff's best friend, or one of his best friends, was the real estate agent. So let's go in. Okay, I like that cottage you have for sale. What are you interested in? And I said, well, I'm a psychiatrist looking for a place in the country and do some research and writing. Let me take you by a place near where I live. To an old mill. I mean, oh my God, is this a dream or what? And
Destiny.
he said, well, and there's no cell phone at that time. So he said, well, it's not for sale. But he said, the reason I'm showing it to you is the other day, the grown children of the couple who own it have moved in town and they're worried about their parents. So they asked me, could you please try to find somebody? So back to their house. Miss Door, can we bring by this man? Yes, you can, Kurt, but we're not going to sell our house. probably thinking as I learned that it was an architect. That happened all the time when we lived there. But anyway, then I went back and how are you? I'm Raymond Moody. Ms. Dorr said, Raymond Moody, Raymond Moody, are you the person who wrote that book? And she said, yeah. Took me to her bookshelf, got out George Ritchie's book, to which I'd written the forward, and opened it and showed me the dedication to them. And she said, well, Dr. George Ritchie is one of our dear, dear friends. That must be a sign. So,
It's all a sign,
there's a
isn't it?
dozen things like that. And
Yeah.
even though it sounds psychotic, in a way, you get to the point where you've got to realize the narrative quality of human consciousness, I think.
I agree. You got to look at the signs, isn't it? It's whether you recognise them or don't. Now, obviously, those ones are quite blatant in that respect. I want a mill. You've ended up in a mill. Now, is that
That's right.
your consciousness bringing that about, or is it
Yes.
just happenstance? But there you
Yes,
go.
that's right. And it's the difficulty about the chance theories of synchronicity is that they don't take the the relevance to a narrative into account. See, it's like the point of a synchronicity is that it's a narrative phenomenon, right? Like two elements of a movie come together that or surprise you, right?
Mm.
And so it's I know that sounds abstruse, but I think in philosophy the big question is what is the nature of the self, right? And Plato kind of carried on with the doctrine that had been pretty well articulated by Pythagoras that the immaterial, immortal soul, which survives death, and which it thanks to Pythagoras, put virtue into it. He said virtue is one of the characteristics of the soul. But at that time, it could move around into other animal species as well, and could move into it was reincarnation
Yeah.
and otherwise. And anyway, so Plato fixed that notion of the immaterial, immortal soul on us. And so when the Christians took over, they burned you at the stake if you denied that, right? So,
Yeah.
so then until things began to loosen up with Thomas Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes famously posed the problem of intelligibility, saying that really, the notion of immortal soul, it brings an idea or a feeling to our mind, but it doesn't make any sense. And then John Locke, I guess, kind of getting in a panic at that. Oh my God, it's true. But he tried to make it into memories, right? That our consciousness or that our self consists of our memories and um, our consciousness. And then David Hume, who loved to get turmoil started, in his writing said, when I look at myself, I'm to be honest, he said, I can't see any substrate or anything. It's just the impression of the moment. And people had to say, well, yeah, he's right.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where it is. I mean, a lot of psychologists think this idea of the self is illusion. But where I'm thinking, I think that your identity is your story, is what you're
Your experience is essentially
yeah,
yes.
your sequence of experience and
Yeah.
your life story. And that's why I think at David Hume, who thought that the notion of an afterlife was illogical, and he said no. He said the only kind of an afterlife that he thought a philosophical person could entertain would be reincarnation. And he doesn't say why, but I suspect it's as a great historian, he understood the role of narrative in human
Mm.
affairs. So he got it that we're all about story is what we're about.
Oh, very
And
much so.
that's the
It's
most
story of
consistent.
humanity is the story itself, which is
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
massively interesting. Well, let's just break down NDEs then. Obviously, you coined the term near-death experience, NDEs. From your perspective, what are they? And can you give us a general guideline of how they manifest?
Yes, there are in situations where somebody comes very close to death, but survives, and often in the event of a cardiac arrest, for example,
Okay.
from which they are resuscitated, or some other severe life-threatening illness, that people have a pattern of experience, I will call it, that if you look at hundreds and hundreds of cases, you'll see that these narratives have about 15 elements that occur again and again. But not every story has each one of these elements. I don't know if you ever read Wittgenstein, but he was talking about the family resemblance. But the idea is that one experience may consist of one or two or three or four of these things, or 9 or 10, or sometimes you get people in these extremely lengthy cardiac arrests that make no medical sense. I mean, my dear friend for years, her doctor told me she was dead for 40 minutes. I mean, it changed
Whoa.
his life.
Yeah.
And I mean, he had, and these are things that I know happen, but there's no way. And in those cases, people tend to have these much more involved cases where the 10 or 15 are these amazing things. But what the pattern of it is that people say that they may hear the doctor say something like, oh my God, he's dead, or we've lost her, or something like that. But they say from their point of view, it seems the opposite. That, as one person said to me, said, many people have expressed this same sentiment, but I remember this one guy in he said, Raymond, he said, I have never been so alive as when that doctor said I was dead. And that is the general sentiment there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what people say, it's not like going into a dream. In the morning, when you come out of a dream, you feel like you're coming back to reality. That's how this is, except this thing we're in now is the dream. And you feel like you're going into the reality. And so people say they leave their physical bodies. They can view from up above, they see the scenes of the resuscitation going down below. They can understand what the doctors and nurses are communicating among themselves, not through hearing a voice, but by knowing what they're thinking. So when they then try to communicate themselves, nobody can see them, nobody can hear them. So at a certain point, they have a realization, oh, this is what's associated with dying. So very often they say it's like a tunnel opened up. They become aware of a passageway or a hallway, and they go down this hallway or passageway, often toward a light, and come out on the other side into this incredibly brilliant and warm and loving light. And people say that, that's totally beyond words. They have no words to express this. But they say in that light that relatives or friends of theirs who have died are there to meet them. And they say it's not like a physical body, but you are aware of the presence of that person in the form, but not as a physical body. And then as this progresses, that it's like when people say everything else kind of disappears and time stands still. You're in a timeless environment, surrounded by a three-dimensional holographic panorama that consists of everything you've ever done in your life. But you review it not from the point of view of how you see it from your perspective, but also you see the same action from the perspective of the point of the folks who you were interacting with, right? Yes. And
Very
so
strange. Hard for us to comprehend that.
yes. And people say that you are in the presence of a being of complete compassion. They say a being of light, or just who can see this panorama with you. And although there are not words, it's like there's this directing of attention to this that are coming from this being to different and questions. Like, it's not verbal questions, but people say it's as though you're being asked, how have you learned to love? To love is the main thing people are put to the test on, but not in a judgmental way. This is very instructive as people. It's like learning, right?
Mm.
So at some point they have to go back. People say, I don't know how I got back. One moment I was in this light, then I was in this back on the table, and no sense of transition. Other people say, well, somebody there told me I had to go back. My uncle or something, it's not your time, you got to go back. Then a third group was given a choice that they can either choose to stay in the light or they can go back to the life they've been leading. Not surprisingly, all the ones they chose to come back. And it's typically because it's always on behalf of somebody else, in my experience, but also most typically because they had young kids left to raise. See, for myself, I would rather have stayed in that light, but I had the young children, so I chose to go back. And when they come back, there's a transformation in their idea about death. They're no longer afraid of death, but also like aware of the significance of love in this life, but also learning. People say that this being kind of focuses in on areas where you've been learning. And one thing I've heard from a lot of people with near-death experiences is they go back to school. Or they become inspired to be artists is another occasional thing.
Well, thank you for that. We'll delve into loads of topics of that. Obviously, Paul, you've just joined us. Thank you ever so much also for coming on in.
Hi, Paul.
Welcome. Thank you. A great name, by the way. Obviously, amazing in every way. Raymond's just given us a grounding of what NDEs are and, the typical experience, so to speak. So that's where the jumping point is.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a few questions then, if you don't mind, Raymond, about the tunnel specifically. Do you think that's a metaphor for a journey to another place, or is it a real thing, conduit?
I don't know. But I do know that is a question that is for some reason of interest to the intelligence community.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had two friends who are in the intelligence community who were curious about that, and I have no idea why, but I don't know.
I think I know why. They want to work out how to get there. So if they can work out the transport method, presumably that they can find a way in or out, even. I don't know.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, I know Raymond has had a lot of contact with the intelligence community. Some of it quite bizarre. He should, if he can, tell some of these stories.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you do that, Raymond?
Well, my story is so plain because, before I met these wonderful people as they are, my image of intelligent people was like James Bond, that all people jumping out of airplanes or running across the trains. But no, this is the nerds. Like,
I knew you were going to do that. Tip-tapping away, yeah.
And it's just absolutely terrific people. I mean, they can't miss a car payment, right? And they're just all goody goodies, and also just so interesting. And for reasons I think I can't fully comprehend, they had me twice to their little. They take you out in the country to these places they have out in the country, and they just ask you all these questions, and that just every one of them is brilliant and kind of nerdy. It was great, but you can't tell what they're interested in because they have some way of you don't ask them questions. They handle it very carefully, just skillfully.
Well, they're going to be slyly getting to the target, aren't they?
Yeah, they milk you for information.
And what they were really interested in, more than it was my work on unintelligibility. See, I'm kind of known for the afterlife thing, but what my interest in philosophy was unintelligibility, as I said, Lewis Carroll, right? And what are the patterns of unintelligibility? And I've written a book on that. My doctoral dissertation part was that was where I was starting that work. And so, that's what they're interested in. And also in terms of what the folks interested in the afterlife are interested in, see. Yes, when we say life after death, it does bring up pleasant images and nice feelings, right? But the question, what is the cognitive content that? And it is zero. Because if you look up the meanings of the words, To say that there is life after death is to say that there is life after the final irreversible cessation of life, which is not,
It doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction.
self-contradiction.
Yeah.
And all of the expressions are that way. Well, the beyond what? As soon as I've done this for years in my philosophy classes, see, as soon as you start asking somebody to formulate, well, what are you talking about, the afterlife? See here, they start going around in a circle of metaphors, or, it makes us feel nice, but it doesn't have any cognitive content. And that's why the near-death experiences are so significant in this, because this gives you a way to intervene on that. Because let me put it this way. When Abraham Lincoln was president, there was a very formal state ceremony. I forgot what it was, but it was, and everybody was gathered around. And his part in the ceremony called for him to mount a horse and to lead a procession away from the scene. But when Lincoln got up on the horse put its own back hoof up and got it caught in the stirrup. So the horse was bouncing around. Everybody was shocked into silence and embarrassed. Oh, poor Mr. Lincoln. But Lincoln just looked down at the horse and said, well, if you're getting on, I'm getting off. And everybody kind of dissolved into laughter, right? Well, if you think about it, that's nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it's amazingly
nonsense
funny
to say that a horse could get on, but it brings a vivid image in your mind. Now, what in the name of God does that have to do with near-death experiences? All right, look, what people tell us with near-death experiences is there are no words, right? I just can't describe it to you. And it was not in space. It wasn't. I didn't go anywhere. This was not in space, and it was not in time. I saw everything I'd ever done, but there was no time passed. But the best way I can explain it is I got out of my body. I went through a tunnel into a light. I met my deceased relatives, saw my life pass in review. I came back to my body and returned to life. Isn't that a travel narrative?
Yeah.
Well,
you went away to find yourself, so to speak.
A travel narrative, if there's no time and space, a travel narrative makes no sense. So you can't really, and people get so attached to the feelings they have and the thoughts they have that they don't really want to subject it to analysis. But as soon as you do, you get into these questions that make you realize that the folks who are just taking it like this face value, oh yeah, wonderful story, and that California look in their eyes, that they're kind of being led down the primrose path. This is a much more complicated thing. And the only way that we're going to resolve that unsatisfied feeling that, see, as soon as people start listening to these near-death stories, they want more of them, right? And if somebody like me starts talking about logic and concepts, as I know, their eyes just roll up and you lose them, right? Well, the reason why the rational investigation goes nowhere is that people are just stuck in the stories and the wonderful story. But as Plato pointed out, the story is necessary because the notion of an afterlife is so obscure. There's got to be some storyline to, just to get it thinking about
to hook you. Yeah.
Yeah, but he said, even if we had a bazillion stories, that's not going to add up to proof of an afterlife. What you need in addition is a set of concepts that will connect the experiential narratives with the sentence, there is life after death. And science is just not going to do it, despite the lunacies of the psychical researchers and the parapsychologists, that their work is unintelligible. It's just like they're living in a dream world, which is fun for them. But it's never going to eliminate that feeling of just wanting more stories. It's like, they're gotta, yeah.
I was speaking to another guest, I don't know, a week or so ago. It might have been a few days ago. They all or they all merge into one.
Oh, yes, I
That's
know.
time
Well,
for you.
well, in a few years, it's going to be, you can't remember whether it was last month or last year.
My memory is very poor. A lot of hits playing football, that's never a good thing. But they were saying that there's no scientific tools that are built ready to
There you go.
analyze this, and that's the big thing, isn't it?
There you go. That is so true. If only people would understand that. See, to say that this is scientific, it's so foolish. I mean, parapsychology and these are my friends. I love these folks. They're just, but it's crazy. And also the counter ego, or the alter egos of parapsychologists are the so-called skeptics, who don't even know what the word skeptic means. These folks are in a church called Humanism, is the central organization. And it's their wonderful publication, The Skeptical Inquirer. But this is a religious publication. And it's because what it means to be a skeptic. I was a professor of Greek philosophy, okay? The skeptical movement was founded by Pyrrho after Aristotle codified logic. And in that framework, there was no such thing as a distinction between the spiritual quest and the intellectual quest. Plato or even Aristotle, what are you talking about, right? But after Aristotle codified logic, Pyrrho, Pyrrho, the skeptic, got to thinking, well, we know logic very well. We can master the system. And so he said, you can think of it as an apparatus for generating conclusions from premises, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Pyrrho said, well, what if we really bear down, we ask every question? And this is the essence of being a skeptic, is that you refrain from drawing a conclusion. That's what the word means, folks. Okay. Now, the reason they did this, it was a spiritual practice, and it for two reasons. Number one, by practicing that assiduously, they realized that it does an amazing thing to your mind. It really does. I mean, David Hume pointed that out, that it really puts you into quite a different state of consciousness. But also, if you think of it geometrically, and everybody else is running in this direction to get to the conclusion, but your technique is to refrain from drawing a conclusion, then that opens up side pathways, see, that everybody else missed because they're heading this way. Then you lit the side roads, okay? And so, knowing that, now run back through your mind what these ignoramuses who have no idea what being a skeptic is. Oh, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. That is, to unpack that, they're saying, I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is such and such.
Yeah.
Those folks are, they are ideologues and practicing a hobby. And, that's the reality.
And there's a lot of those people around these days. They're everywhere, all over social media. Can't get away from it. Because I know Paul's just joined and I want to get you involved, Paul. So let's think about the overall theory behind NDEs. Consciousness is clearly involved somehow. What do you put it down to being? What are we in relation to there?
In relation to consciousness, I think it's virtually impossible to describe consciousness, to explain what it is and where it comes from. I base that on the fact that so many people have tried to do it, Nobel Prize winners included, and have been unable to determine what consciousness really is. Do you agree with that, Raymond?
Well, I agree with it entirely. I mean, I think the problem of life after death really consists of a couple of different philosophical questions, but one of them is, what is the nature of self-identity? And, Pythagoras, the immaterial, immortal soul and such. And then Plato took that up and made it official doctrine. Koit and I were talking about this earlier. And, you know, you could be burned at the stake for denying that. So what is the self? And really, I give up in reality, but in terms of my conjecture at this age of 80, having thought about it most of my life, I would say that what it is your story. Yourself is your story. And that's why I think
many
David
people
Hume
define,
was.
yeah.
Hmm?
Oh, many people
Yeah.
defined it as your soul.
Yeah, well, what does that mean? So,
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's once
yeah.
you keep running into this brick wall when you try to determine what
Well,
consciousness.
as Thomas Hobbes pointed out to us, you know, but you know, and he was just in the 1500s, they were kind of forced out of the burning people business, so he got he got away with that.
Thing is,
But
consciousness
they
is
would go
clearly a
right
thing,
back
though.
into the burning people business if we
Oh,
didn't
well,
have
yeah.
They would absolutely
But
if we let
consciousness,
them
we,
loose.
we know it's clearly a thing. Well, not you can't necessarily quantify this thing, but we'll just call it a thing for want of a better phrase.
Sure.
Are we, again, like the NDE experience, are we ever going to be in a position, do you think, where we could quantify it and find a
Yes,
pathway to its explanation?
yes, yes, and that I'll tell you how.
Oh,
And that
good.
is just to realize that Aristotle was wrong about unintelligibility and Plato was right. But Aristotle got to write the logic book. And Plato said that nonsense has a structure. There's different types of it. 'Twas brilliant, the slithy toasted gyre and gimble and the wave. Holiness breathes the vestigial lipstick of spontaneity. That cannibal you men just ate was the last one in this city. Or hat thoroughly the if will zoom how zest, or there's infinite varieties of different types of nonsense, and they all have a universal structure to them. See, is and so with that we can get across this, because when somebody realizes that while they're still alive, that you can, there's different types of unintelligibility. Then when they subsequently have a near-death experience, which has already happened, by the way, that they will be forced to articulate the story in a different way, because they will realize that when you say, I got, that there's no time and no space, and then it's nonsense to say that I got out of my body and so on. So they will correct it, because people speak nonsense deliberately, Lewis Carroll or Dr. Seuss, right? Or inadvertently, like when the coach says, you guys pair up in threes, right? Well, this coach is talking nonsense, but once you point out, oh, he said, okay, well, he hopefully won't do it anymore. Or people can talk nonsense involuntarily, like when they're delirious or delusional or there's different types of nonsense that sick people talk. But when they do, the nonsense that people talk involuntarily from illness is the same types of nonsense that Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll make up deliberately. So when knowing these things, when somebody has a near-death experience, they will realize when they're trying to tell it that to talk about it as a travel narrative makes no sense. So they will be forced to talk about it in a new way. It's already happened once. A wonderful man who was like a sculptor and also was worked with Bell of the Bell theorem. Just this wonderful, very kind, brilliant man. Was at one of my seminars, and then some years later had H1N1, almost died, lost his leg during his 60 days of hospitalization, had 3, I think it was, cardiac arrest. Called me to tell about his near-death experience. But in the midst of this, he said, and Raymond, he said, while I was over there, he said, my mind went back to the nonsense seminar. And he said, and I saw that what you're saying is true. He said, And as he put it, he said, you can't comprehend how that world is connected to this world unless you take the unintelligibility axis into account. And that is the logical and rational reality. However, what keeps people into this interest in this near-death experience is they just love stories. And they are trying to find a story way to the rational proof of an afterlife. It will never work. But when somebody can get over their disgust at the word nonsense, it's incredible to me. There are people who think that they are really interested in, rational proof of an afterlife, but they can't get over the fact that there's two senses. Nonsense is an exclamatory expression, interjection. It is an act of apodeopsis, is what that's called. And it's a condemnation of something as false or unintelligible. But the meaning of the word nonsense, not that stupid interjection which is in people's mind, is language, right? Which is unintelligible due to, number 3, lack of meaning. And that is not only a knowable and fathomable concept, but it's very easy to do but people just won't get over that, their hatred of that word. It's incredible to me.
Breaking this all down, Raymond, is this just simply a case of we lack the words, the tools, the mindset, everything to explain that versus this, and they can't really mix?
From my experience for a long time, my first encounter with, when I was in the 8th grade, okay, and my Miss Grind was my teacher. And on the first day, we were asking, she asked us, what is your favorite book? Well, these were 14, 13-year-old boys. Okay. So, and this was an all-male school. So, and everybody else, it was the sports magazine or the adventure. And so when she got to me, what's your famous book, Raymond? Or your favorite book, Raymond? And I said, my favorite book is Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss. Everything. And she said, well, why is that your favorite book? And I said, well, because it's about the concept of how we might communicate with another dimension. And so the class fell silent. But anyway, it's like all my life I've had this struggle, because it's like people are so much is excluded from their lives because they hate that word. It's just incredible. But it's a good opening for me, see, because I've got a very,
you just love
very
Dr.
limited
Seuss.
market here. This is definitely keeping out of, it's like it's enabled me to form a community of people who are interested in the afterlife in the real way, right? Because they have seen this, that's right, that all the sentences we use about the afterlife are currently nonsensical. However, nonsense is a placeholder. Go back in your mind to the year 1915, okay, and be a very intelligent, informed, well-educated person of 1915. And listen to the following 3 sentences. Sentence number 1, all 4 of Ethel's grandparents perished and were lost in a shipwreck long before her mother and father were born. That's nonsense, isn't it?
Correct.
In 1915. Now add the knowledge of the role of DNA in heredity, gene splicing, gene editing, cloning, and we have got a scenario, not something that is true yet, but which is intelligible, right?
It's possible, yeah.
Yeah. Or go back to 1915 and listen to this. I watched a movie on my phone this morning. See, so my point is, nonsense and unintelligibility is something that shifts, and that it doesn't mean from the fact that the sentence "there's life after death" is unintelligible in 2025. That doesn't imply that it will be in 2026. But to make that breakthrough, you've got to come into the reality that nonsense itself is a complex mode of language. It is actually more structured than ordinary meaningful language. And I know that's a paradox, but see, like most people think of nonsense, if this is ordinary meaningful language, this level, most people think nonsense is down here, right? That is sublinguistic. But that's not the reality. If you think it through, you realize, no, nonsense is a secondary accrual on the top of ordinary meaningful language. And it has more complicated rules to, and so that's why it's harder to think about.
So are you
And
saying
in America, people don't like to think. It's Britain, it used to be different, but I think, you know.
so are you saying that nonsense is future talk?
Well,
Everybody's
nonsense is,
talking about the future through
if
nonsense?
you if you look at the history of reason and rational thought, nonsense has always been a placeholder. My favorite science, other than astronomy, was chemistry, and I think in that way. If you go back, see like to where the the Greek philosophy met the Egyptian materials technology during the Hellenistic age. See, then what people were trying to do is they had their materials here, and they would utter nonsense over them like magic words, blah, 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 trying to affect transmutations. And you can even find some of these formulas. But then over a period of time, some of this worked, right? And so gradually you see the emergence of intelligibility from something that is originally unintelligible. And sometimes it can happen very quickly. Like also in 1915, if you heard two people say, you read in the newspaper that two women got married to each other at City Hall. Yeah, that would be nonsense in 1915.
Right.
But technological change or conceptual change, new knowledge, can make something that was once unintelligible intelligible. But
if we take life
people
after
are
death,
not
though,
set up.
if we
People are
take
not
that,
set up.
sorry,
Yeah,
you go
they're
on.
just not.
I was going to say, if you take life after death, that phrase, that's the thing. I think, yes, clearly many years ago that was nonsense to people because they just dismissed it out of hand. But
that's right.
Where would you place it today? And this goes to
there
both
you
of
go.
you because I think
there
that's in for most people.
I saw that happen, Koit. I really did. In 1976 and 7, or no, actually, that was part of, the first one was in 1975. I had a group of people who had near-death experiences that I knew, but had never known anybody else who had such an experience, right? The first one was in 75. I did several of these meetings into the 77, 78, where I'd bring together people who for the first time were meeting somebody else who had a near-death experience. And it was fascinating to watch because we already saw why it is nonsense to say if there's no time and space, but I got, I'm quite sorry, right? But nonetheless, that when people would say that in this group, people would agree. Yeah, that's why. See, in other words, that this is demonstrably unintelligible, but nonetheless, it sends a message. There's something there. Somehow that nonsense is correlating with some feature of the near-death experience. So what that means is that this is gradually coming into usage, see, so that what was unintelligible 50 years ago was now more intelligible. But it's a very interesting thing, and I'm going to draw something here for you. But
okay, what he's drawing that, Paul? What do you think on life after death? Where would you put people versus the concept of life after death? How many people do you think believing it percentage-wise?
I think but when people, as Raymond would probably put it, reduce it to a story, that's what we have to do because that's how we live. That's how we communicate. I'm always intrigued by his commentary on nonsense. I don't fully understand it. We've talked about this for years, and I don't fully understand it. Uh, but there has to be other ways to describing what's going on here. So when you say, well, there's life after death, well, that is nonsense.
Yeah, it
But
is. And
but I
that's
don't
all
know.
right.
But I don't know what the option is. You know, it's
Well, the
perceived
option
life
is to
after
make it
death.
intelligent. And Coit, this is what I was going to show you. I don't know if you
Sure.
can see this, but there's two drawings here, right?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, all right. Now, look, I'm going to tell you two nonsense words. These were made up to be nonsense, unintelligible words, okay? Um, Teketa and Maluma, okay? Those are nonsense words.
Hmm.
Which one is the Teketa and which one is the Maluma?
I, I'm going to say Maluma's the circular one.
And I would as well, based on like a
Yeah,
fruit sound. Yeah.
96% I think of it, everybody said. But what that means is those words are nonsense, but somehow they jive with these drawings. And so, but this is a very complicated thing, and it's deeply embedded in the spiritual life. It's in the Christians, it was the glossolalia, or speaking in unknown tongues, which is spontaneous utterance of nonsense syllables in your own language. It comes from but in a way that avoids grammatical structures and avoids meaningful combinations. And when you carry out that for a while, you come into a phenomenal ecstatic state. I mean, it really works. And as I said, sadly earlier, Coit, is before you came, Paul, I have something that came up at 2 that I need to do. So
No worries.
sorry.
Well, look, thank you for your time. I definitely want to speak to you again because I have a shed load of
Great,
questions that we could go through on the ND experience from start to finish, and
great.
then work out where you sit with it. But thank you for your time.
I'm looking forward to it.
Super lush.
Great. Thank
Goodbye.
you so much.
See you, Raymond.
See you.
Okay, and Raymond's popped off. So, Paul, loads of
Well,
questions for you on consciousness, and then you can take the brunt of it now.
yeah. Well, I think people have trouble with the nonsense for not just reasons that it has a negative connotations. It's just that it doesn't make sense.
Well, that's
So
it. Nonsense. It's as
that's
simple
it.
as
I
that.
know it's nonsense. And when he
But I
talks
think you
about
hit on it
non,
anyway with the time thing. That's it. Over time, it
right,
becomes more intelligible, meaning you have a
right.
problem and we've now solved it or can solve it. That's it.
Well, yeah, and things just they create their own body. Like if you look at Google, when
Hmm.
that first came out, I thought this is the most ridiculous name I've ever heard. But now it's repeated by myself dozens of times a day. So, and is that connected to nonsense? To me, it is. To some extent, it is. Uh, but I'm still not on top of what Raymond is getting at, other than we try to codify everything in our lives. And one way to do that is to tell stories. The other way is to just use things that don't make sense, use words that don't make sense. Like life after death works for me, even though I know it's nonsensical.
Yeah, it works for me as well because you can understand the premise of what it's trying to say is what is there after, and it's as
Right.
simple as that. Okay, so let's look into. I mean, you're aren't you a paranormal investigator in your own right? Have I got
Sure.
that correct?
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
Super lush. So you'll know loads of these then when I ask the questions. Regarding to NDEs themselves,
Yeah.
how do you research cases? Is it just anecdotal or is there other methods?
It's largely just anecdotal. And unless you could actually get into actually stopping people's hearts and starting them again and
Hmm.
do a real, that would be probably true science. That you can get close to it by dealing with people like Pim van Lommel in Amsterdam, where he's a cardiologist and he's taken some of his studies have him looking at the next 100 people who have a cardiac arrest, and then he talks to them about what they saw, if anything. And his conclusions are that I think it's about 15 to 20% of people who have a cardiac arrest. That's the gold standard in this business, is someone who's actually had their heart stopped. About 15 to 20% of those people have many, if not all, the features of a near-death experience. And that's the best way really to examine this whole field is with people who have already actually had their hearts stop.
Mm.
Uh, so that's what you're looking for is people who have the gold standard. It doesn't always present itself. There's it's a little messier than that. But that's what we start out with in studying near-death experiences.
That's still a
And
high percentage, though, isn't it? 20% of
very
these
high,
100
yeah.
cases. Yeah, very high. Is he the one that put like shoes or notes on top of cabinets? Is that doctor?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's not a doctor. What is she? I think she's a nurse. She was in Seattle. Can't remember her name. But yeah, those are always interesting when people see things that no one else knows are there.
Mm.
You know, that happens a lot. And that would be kind of to some extent, a precognitive experience, where a typical precognitive experience would be that if you woke up in the middle of the night and you saw a friend or a relative standing at the end of your bed, and they said, "I'm dying today. I've passed away. I'm dead. Whatever." Uh, and then in the morning, you get a phone call from someone who tells you that that person has actually died unexpectedly. That's a precognitive experience. And that to me is one of the things that actually shows that consciousness leaves the body and can transfer thoughts to somebody else. So that's an objective experience. And a near-death experience is a subjective experience. And there's part of the problem. And that's why we wrote the book we did, Proof of Life After Life. Is that with a near-death experience, it's subjective. Meaning if I had a near-death experience and you came in to see me at the hospital and I told you everything that happened. I left my body, I saw dead relatives, I went up a tunnel, I saw a bright light. Uh, it's it's my experience. It's not an experience that you witnessed, and that makes it subjective. Even though many people have near-death experiences and many people have exactly the same type of near-death experience, that's a good indication that there's something happening there that we're not witnessing. That's more, I'll say spiritual. That's probably not the right word, but it's more mystical and more spiritual.
Mm.
But if you have someone who shares that experience, and that in the case of a precognitive experience, the one I just described, where someone is seen at the end of the bed, and then you find out later that they've died as they told you when they were at the end of the bed. That's an objective experience. And that means that uh, your experience has been witnessed by somebody, and it's the kind of thing that could possibly stand up in court if these were, to go to court. But
Mm.
that's what we decided to take a look at. For years, in all the books we've written, I've written probably 16 books on this subject, 6 of them with Raymond. And we always, in almost every book, we've had a shared death experience. That is when a person who is dying shares their experience with at least one other person. And it seems unlikely that it happens, but it happens more often than you would imagine. But so that's what we decide to focus on as a means of proving that consciousness leaves the body.
And of those, first off, I want to say shared death experience. I imagine not a lot of people have heard that phrase in that respect. They all
Right.
have heard of near death experience. And even I didn't know fully what the explanation was of shared death experience. And now what
Right.
you've said, it's all slots into play and makes sense for me.
Yeah.
Of the near death experience, where say 20% of them see, then breaking that further, how much of that 20% do you think has the shared death part?
No one's done the math on that. So I would guess. And then here's another thing that once you mention these, people start saying, "Oh yeah, I had that." And then there's many different flavors of shared death experience. So you end up with generally way more than you expect. Like
Mm.
with near-death experiences, when Raymond named and defined the near-death experience, all of a sudden, all these people who had had this experience or knew people who had had it came out of the closet and they started talking about it. Now, I did early on when I was first writing the first book I did with Raymond. I went out one evening with a number of friends. We went to a movie, and then we went and stopped at Denny's. I don't know if you're familiar with Denny's, but
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
chain restaurant. And it was kind of late at night, and they said, "Well, what are you working on right now?" And I told them, and they said, "Well, that's nonsense. That doesn't happen." And there were five or six people at the table. A couple kept their mouths shut, but everyone else said, "No, that's bullshit." And so I stood up in the Denny's and I told people, excuse me, I want to talk to you about what I'm working on right now. And I told them what I was working on. Out of 20 people in the restaurant, about seven of them had stories, either their own or stories of friends and loved ones who had had these experiences. And they knew nothing about the experience. They knew nothing about near-death experiences. But once you start to talk to people about it, you can see them light up, and then they'll say, well, yeah, I had one of those when I had a car accident, or my mother had one when she was dying. And then you start to get a mass of people. So that's happening with shared death experiences. We talked about these shared death experiences in this book, and now we're getting more and more people coming around saying, well, I had that, or I communicated with my mother when she passed away. uh, you're starting to get more and more people. So what I'm getting at is it's very difficult to suss out how many people, uh, out of those 20% of people who have NDEs, how many people are having shared NDEs. Just don't know yet. I would put it at, probably 2 or 3% of
Mm.
people who have NDEs, but I bet it's way more than that.
And if you extrapolate that test, let's just assume that 20% of people who die or have their heart
Yeah.
stops have these experiences. That's, a couple of billion people in the world, isn't it?
Well, it's a
You
lot.
know, yeah. And when you look at
It's
it
a
like
lot.
that, that's huge. And also, the shared death, a lot of people, like I said, don't know how to, didn't even know it was a thing. So they wouldn't necessarily categorize it as a shared death experience. But when you open them up to
Right.
the terms, they can then put themselves
Yeah.
in those categories, presumably.
So, like you have ones like the precognitive experience. That's just obviously a shared death experience. But there's others. There's a number of, this is weird. I run into this a lot more than I ever thought I would. Uh, Doctors and nurses primarily who see a mist rising from a person who's dying.
Awesome.
And it'll generally be described as being greenish or gray. Oftentimes, it's a mist just rises from their entire body and then kind of dissipates uh, in the air. Uh, and and they talk about it willingly now. They didn't used to talk about this willingly at all. That's a whole other subject. But there's a lot of people who see that, and that's a shared death experience because when a person is dying, they are sharing a dying experience with you. So it's not always like verbally or visually
Mm.
communicating with somebody. It can be something like that. Uh, uh, Another example would be someone who's on the operating table and they have an out-of-body experience. 50% of people who have near-death experiences have out-of-body experiences. And so someone's on the operating table, they have a cardiac arrest, they leave their body, they see what's going on in the operating room. They can oftentimes describe surgical tools, recall conversations, recall the dirty jokes that the surgeon says. Uh, and and that's a shared death experience because then when they come out and they start talking about it in recovery, they're totally accurate,
Mm. It's
So
mind bending, isn't it? I was going to ask
what's
you actually,
fun?
very mind bending. I was going to ask you about the medical staff side of things. One of my questions I've written: what is the percentage? Sorry, not percentage. What is the perceptions now amongst medical staff to this phenomenon? I mean, it used to be obviously it didn't happen. We'll ignore it, shove it under the carpet. But is it now like a quiet acknowledgement that it exists, or are they openly saying everything?
I feel like they're openly saying things. Once they find out what I do, they tell their story or they tell someone else's story. Uh, and I'll tell you how it all started because I started writing these books. I met Raymond 38 years ago. And in the course of writing The Light Beyond, which was the first book I was writing with him, I was also writing a book on reversing heart disease with a doctor at Cleveland Clinics. And I was in Cleveland. I was talking to this doctor. He was an older guy, Herman Hellerstein. And he said, "Well, what else are you working on?" So we're standing at this nurse station at the hospital. And he says, "Well, what else are you working on?" And I told him about the book I was working on with Raymond, near-death experiences, and body separating from, consciousness separating from the body, that kind of thing. And he says, "That's not true. That doesn't happen. I've resuscitated thousands of people," which of course is an overstatement. But he said, I've resuscitated thousands of people, and I've never heard one of these at all." So he gets called away to see a patient, and the nurses all came over to the stand in front of the nurses station, and they said, "Well, he doesn't hear them from people because he doesn't talk to the people.
There you go. Yeah.
He really doesn't ask questions." And we've heard many of them. They all started telling stories about NDEs that they had heard. That was then. And he wasn't denying that he wasn't not necessarily denying that they exist. He was saying he'd never heard them. Therefore, they didn't exist. And over the years now, it's changed completely, where I can talk to doctors and they will almost always have a story that has puzzled them, and it's somehow related to the traits of a near-death experience. So there's a lot of them around. And then there was one. I live in Arizona, and there's one of the best neurological hospitals in the world here. And the doctor who headed it was a doctor named Robert Spetzler. Really, as you can imagine, really straight edge guy.
Hmm.
About 8 hours of sleep every night, and did brain surgery. And he was doing surgery on a woman who had a coming aneurysm. Her blood vessel was about to burst in her brain, and that was one of his specialties. So he prepared her for surgery, which means putting on ear muffs so you can't hear anything, putting on eye patches because there's a lot of bone
Fragments.
shards
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
ear, and so he put these eye patches on. Uh, some other things to just deaden the senses. Uh, and when she came out of it, this is what converted him. When she came out of it, she told him all went through the whole surgery from a perspective of being against the ceiling. That she had seen his tools and the tools he used and had never seen them before. She saw the tools, she described them, she drew them. She talked about conversations they were having. She was doing, visual check on the room. And that really blew his mind. This is like a veteran, voted #1 neurosurgeon in the world, 15 years ago. And this is what he saw, and he'd never seen any of this stuff before. And to him, that made him believe that consciousness survives bodily death. That's where we went with shared death experiences. We decided to do the book on like 7 different shared type of shared death experiences. One would be out of body experiences, uh, precognitive experiences is another one. The transformation that occurs during a near death experience is something you can witness in people.
Yeah. This is the weird thing, isn't it? I
Yeah,
was going to ask about this again. Is people returning with gifts or changes?
yeah,
What
right.
do the studies show in relation to like both of those things? Because you can change your mindset, which is one thing, but if you suddenly become, I don't know, psychic or that sort of thing. One NDE I spoke to suddenly worked in numerology as an example. What's that
Right.
all about?
I don't know what that's all about, but it's true. Uh, there's I was involved in a big study in Seattle called the Transformation Study. And we looked at it. It was headed by Melvin Morris. We looked at uh, people who had near-death experiences 10, 20, when they're in their teen years even, and as childhood NDEs, to see how it affected them over the course of their life. And what we found is that there was a definite, someone surprise you, decrease in death anxiety. That they felt that they knew what existed on the other side, and they were okay with that. They were not concerned about dying anymore. They had a higher zest for living, which means that the way they defined it in the study was people have type A, they're very type A without the anger. And they have a real zest for learning. People who go to the other side uh, frequently find themselves in some kind of a venue of learning. Some will say they found themselves in what they call like a crystal uh, library. Others, they just are, say they're downloaded with information, and they're frustrated because when they come back, they've lost most of that information. But it's also very transformative because another thing is they have a higher intelligence. Uh, and the way they defined it in the study was that people who have NDEs evolve into higher beings. Um,
That's
and
amazing. Have we tested that, by the way? Like, you could have a Mensa test prior, I don't know, 10 years ago, and then people come back, and then they've had another Mensa test, and they're way off the chart. Have we got anything like that?
that can be definitely done. We did part of that in this study, but the study varied a little bit from that. But yeah,
Mm.
they're smarter later than they were earlier, or they have a sense of being smarter,
Mm.
and that can be quite helpful. Uh, they they have an increase in uh, psychic abilities, and this is where it gets woo-woo. They We found out that they have 4 times as many psychic abilities. How would they put it? Verifiable psychic experiences than the ordinary population. So a person who's had an NDE, they will have a psychic experience that can be proven. So
Yeah.
an example would be, like an extreme example would be that you wake up in the morning and you say, I had a dream last night that this plane I was going to take today to go to LA is going to crash, and I'm not going to fly. And then they don't fly, and then the plane crashes. That would be a verifiable, very extreme, verifiable psychic experience. But they have 4 times as many as people have who have never had a near-death experience.
Mm. It makes you
Uh,
wonder why people are coming back changed. It's almost like an interjection somehow for some reason. That's what my
yeah.
brain goes to. But this is all obviously theoretical stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quick psychological treatment. That's one
Yeah, you
thing.
could argue that, can't you? Maybe.
Yeah.
Where does your mind sit on prison planet versus school planet if we go down that route?
How
Have
do
you
you
heard
mean that?
those?
No,
Sorry?
I've never. What do you? I don't know
Oh, you've
what
not
you.
heard them. Okay,
No.
let's just take it that souls come to this planet
Yeah,
to either learn, us in it's a school,
yeah,
or souls that are imprisoned here as a prison planet because we've done something from wherever we're from negative and therefore we're put here to learn again.
yeah.
That's what both of those are. Are the near death experiences and the subsequent changes, are they like path adjustments to say, look, get back to your learning?
Well, there is a lot of that. I mean, they do have life reviews, as Raymond was talking about, and quite extensive life reviews. But I could never put a tag on Prison Planet
Mm.
because I don't really know. That's a little new agey for me. I don't feel like this stuff is really that new age, to tell you the truth.
No, that's fair enough. It's just that's where my mind goes because I always look at the end game of these things, you know.
Well, you could look at that psychologically. I think Carl Jung might even come up with something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, stop it, Paul. You're self imprisoning yourself or something weird like that.
Well, that might be it. It might be, you're a prison person, you know, as opposed to a prison planet, you
Yeah,
know.
I don't know. It's all weird. So maybe I should get off that topic quick so I don't put myself in it.
Well, it's kind
Um,
of interesting,
yeah,
I don't want to point fingers at everybody on Earth being
but
in a
just
prison.
me. Yeah.
No, not just you. Just, it might be a little more sparsed out than that. Then so like I said, we chose 7 areas of study to look at shared death experiences in. Another one was spontaneous muses, which gets into this, and that is that people do pick up new skills completely. Uh, did Raymond mention Tony Socorro?
He did not know.
Did not. Okay, Tony's a orthopedic surgeon in upstate New York, and he's really quite good. He's a great dude, and he's never played piano in his life. So one day he was out playing golf, and he was struck in the head by a bolt of lightning, and he he had actually had lined up at a payphone to call his mother because it was her birthday, and there were other people behind him. So he got struck by a bolt of lightning. He went down, his heart stopped. A few people back was an ER nurse, and she pounded on his chest, got him to come back. And after that, he was never the same, but it was a good thing. He started studying music. He heard music in his head, and he's a piano, and he started continuously obsessing on this music. And so he hired somebody who had gone to a music school in New York, and she taught him the basics of piano, and he learned how to write music and play music. And he did this for a few years. You know, it takes years and years and years to be a great pianist. It just took him a few years. And since then, he has played in Austria and at concert halls in Austria. He played at Lincoln Center in New York. He's incredible. And he picked this all up through this near-death experience. It just like opened a gateway for him. And that happens enough to talk about it, put it that way. I mean, there's a lot of people who become really good writers from their experiences. A lot of painters. When you go to like near-death experience conferences, there's always people who bring their artwork and show that off. And so he became quite a player. Chopin, it was what he really got into, and he has his own CDs now of his own music.
See, when you hear these stories, it makes you just wow, doesn't it? Because that's not a standard for people. So it is something cosmically given, or is it just a side effect of the NDE? I don't know. And then you'd have to ask why.
Well, the way I look at it is it's cosmically given until proven otherwise.
Yes, that's how I'd go as well.
Because that's, Occam's razor, the easiest explanation is usually it. And to me, that's the easiest explanation. They get zapped by lightning, or I had another guy, Indian doctor, anesthesiologist, Raj Party. And he was an anesthesiologist at Bakersfield Heart Hospital. And he got very ill. He got a bad infection on Christmas Eve. And his wife drove him all the way down to LA. She felt it was so dangerous. She took him down to LA. And he was full of pus from his infection. They took him in, they drained all the pus out. And in the course of this, he left his body. He was able to see what was going on in the emergency room. And throughout his whole surgery, what the doctors were saying, quote, "My God, this is the smelliest surgery I've ever done." And he was telling other jokes about Raj and about this whole situation. And Raj started seeing. So he goes into recovery, and he tells the doctor what happened, and the doctor dismisses it, and nurse dismisses it, everyone dismisses him. Tells his own wife about it, and he tells her the rest of the story is that he saw all these angels, and they were Christian angels, and Raphael and God, I should know these, Raphael and one other angel. And they were giving him advice and their advice was quit anesthesiology, get essentially out of medicine and start teaching conscious start teaching people consciousness-based healing. And he said, "What's that?" And they said, "You have to figure it out." So then he went on, he saw a very bright light. He felt like he had been infused with new information in his life. And he started meditating. And he could and can to this day uh, have these angels come and visit him. And he talks to them about consciousness-based healing. And he's building a whole practice based on CBH, as he calls it, in Santa Cruz, California. And he's building a whole practice on that. And he can still conjure, if you will, these angels on a daily basis. All he has to do is start meditating. And he's had all kinds of things, precognitive experiences. He's been quite extensive. And it's changed him completely. He quit his medical practice and
Not a
moved.
small step. Yeah, not a small step.
Oh, it's huge. And his wife was upset about it.
I bet.
And they went from Bakersfield to Santa Cruz, and that's where he started his CBH practice.
And I bet if you ask him, he'll say he's more happy today than he was then.
He's
That's normally
happy.
the case.
He is happy. He's definitely that. But he also feels like he's on a path that he doesn't totally know the route, you know.
Yeah. And that brings me to my next question, which is on that very basis, actually. Why are so many people needing these path adjustments from the NDE experiences? Because that's what seems to be happening.
That's somebody up there, the guy who controls the lightning.
Potentially, yeah.
Sees
Something's
that they
happening
need
to move people on a chessboard, let's just put it like that, to take humanity or something in a different direction. So
Yeah.
is that what you think from this?
Well, that's possible. I mean, I would use my Occam's razor on that one because I think that does make sense. But uh, they're puzzled. A lot of people are puzzled because they know they picked up this information. They know that it's going to amount to a big change in their life, and they don't know why, but they're willing to follow whatever it is they're supposed to follow. Sometimes this vaguely defined path. As a result, a high percentage of people who have near-death experiences get divorced because they're no longer the same person. The wife may have known them when they were angry type A, and now that they're type A, but they're not angry anymore, they can't relate to them in the same way, and they end up getting divorced. So it does have a high rate of divorce. People who have had NDEs, but we feel that we've. I want to point something else out too.
Yeah, go for it.
There's healing. There's healing associated with this, and there's healing associated with the light that people see in spiritually transformative experiences, which broadens it out from NDE, shared death experiences, and then spiritually transformative experiences. I just got back from Egypt. I've been working on a documentary. I did it well. I'll give you my whole Egypt story. Years ago I started reading apocryphal gospels. And I thought, well, Jesus is the most influential person in the world ever, but we really don't know that much about him. And these apocryphal gospels and the Quran and other things that aren't considered apocryphal gospels, but are more solid than apocryphal, have stories about Jesus being in Egypt. So in Matthew, it talks about Jesus and the Holy Family leaving Israel to get away from King Herod. And he's at that time maybe 2 years old. And they go to Egypt. And then the Bible just doesn't tell what happens until about 5 or 6 verses later in Matthew. And it says that an angel appeared to Joseph and told him that King Herod had died and you can go back to Israel. So that's when they leave the center of Egypt and they go back to Israel. So there's a big gap in there of no knowledge in the Bible about what he was doing as a child. But I went to Egypt and I started finding out that there's sites in Egypt that both Muslims and Christians believe are places where Jesus and the Holy Family stopped when they were in Egypt, and various things happened, miracles, visions, things like that. And both religions, because Jesus, believe it or not, is big in the Quran. There's way more stories about Jesus, Joseph, and Mary in the Quran than there are in the Bible. And they believe that they're both intertwined, Christianity and Islam. Hard to believe the way they act now, but they're
Oh
both
God,
intertwined.
yeah. The same with Judaism, isn't it? They're all from the same
They're all, yeah, the
Abrahamic
people of the
thing.
book, as Muhammad
Mm,
called it. Yeah.
yeah.
And so anyway, they put together a thing called the Holy Family Trail. And I went there and I started running into stories about Jesus, where he was, and on, and different miracles that took place then. And the Pope at the time, Pope Shenouda, the Egyptian Pope, Christian Pope, gave me a map to follow. So I wrote a book about it. I followed this trail of Jesus in Egypt, and then went back. A producer got a hold of me and wanted me to do a documentary on it. So I went back and did a documentary on the entire trail. But what I found is that even in modern times, there are these visions that people are having in Egypt, and they all have a powerful connection with light. And there was a vision in particular in the center of Egypt, in a town called Asut, and millions, literally millions of people came to see it. In the U.S., there was one article in the New York Times, and that was it. But in Europe and in Africa and the Middle East, millions of people came to Asut to see these flashing lights coming down from the heavens. And uh, they found these priests started collecting information from people and found that they had been healed of
By
different things.
standing directly under, or just seeing it. Which
Well,
one?
it was hard to say standing under because seemed to be all over the place. But they would stand by this church. It came right down over uh, an area, steeple of a church that was claimed to be the spot where the Holy Family turned around and went back to Israel. And these lights continued for 3 months, 3.5 months, and off and on, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. And like hundreds of people claimed to be healed. These priests gathered a questionnaire from everyone who said they were healed, and then said, "We'll only accept the questionnaire if you give us your medical records." So then he took the medical records and he took them to a group of Muslim and Christian doctors, and they went through them and in the process decided who was healed and who wasn't by this or could have been healed by it.
Yeah.
And that is where I actually saw light in action. These people who have near-death experiences talk about a bright light appearing to them. Uh, Other people talk about a bright light, not just in their head like it is with an NDE, uh, but start talking about this healing light appearing to them. And then now you have this whole, you know, thousands of people who are claiming to be healed by this light. And there's something about the light because it appears in almost every spiritually transformative experience that is healing and life changing. And no one appears to know what it is. Sometimes it's visible, it's like a shared light, if you will. Other times it's not visible at all. But a couple of weeks ago, when I was there, I went to see the current Pope. And I talked to bishops, like 6 bishops, people, these are high up in the believer area, and citizens too. What's the light? What is the light? What do you feel when you're hit by the light? And they have no idea what the light is, but they all say it's part and parcel with healing. And you see that a lot with near-death experiences. I'm doing a roundabout way here, but
Sure.
with near-death experiences, people talk about the light being healing. I mean, we've had uh, children and adults who have been healed from cancer, after seeing a light, after having an NDE. Anita Morjani, who's had her cancer cured, uh, was also exposed to this bright light during her NDE. And yes, so we've seen people of all ages who have seen the light, have it affected them seriously. And uh, I don't know what it is. That's another one. So that's another one for old Occam, you know.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, but why don't many people around? I mean, I do because I'm involved in it. I'm interested, so I look for this sort of stuff. You're clearly interested because you research it. In
Yeah.
the wider scheme of things, why do not the majority of people know about this thing? Is it because we've suppressed it, or have we clouded it with the crap that we've invented?
It's it's thought of as being bogus or not authentic. It's a lot like UFOs in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, that here in Arizona about 20 years ago they had this huge sighting of UFOs flew right over the city, and that got a lot of attention
Oh, the
because
Phoenix Lights, yeah.
the Phoenix Lights, because there's so many people and they're Americans, right? So we're not wacky, and
No, not
and
at all.
and no, and they saw it and so they believe it. And if this other stuff with Egypt, when it happens in Egypt, it doesn't show up in our papers. For one thing, it doesn't
Mm.
show up well, these took place in the time of newspapers, but it doesn't really show up in uh, whatever it should show up in on the internet. You don't see it on CNN.
No, you
I
don't. Do
see,
you know what you do see there? Is someone talking about who's dating who, and someone's like have had a big Brazilian butt lift or something like that. That's
exactly
news.
the
But this
butt
stuff is
lifter.
profound for humanity. So why is it not the
I
main
don't have
thing?
any idea. I think it has a bad rep in the news business. I think people think, well, if someone says they saw a UFO, they were drinking or they're goofy or it was an airplane or something like that. And then Jimmy Carter comes along and says he saw one, and that hits the papers. And
Mm.
then fighter pilots in the Navy, they're now releasing footage of fighter pilots chasing these, got things that look like Tic Tacs, and the Phoenix Lights. So it's just, or it's like what a lot of people theologians and people who research this always say, once you've had a near-death experience, you believe it. And until then, people are always skeptical. I use the word skeptic in a modern form, but they're very skeptical of it.
And I'm with you. I think it comes down to that word experience. At the end
Sure,
of the day, you don't believe until you've been through it, and then you know it. You don't believe, you know.
absolutely right.
And we can only just like I can only hang on your words, and you can only hang on the words of other people, can't you?
Yeah.
Have you ever had an experience yourself?
Of exactly what kind?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Let's just say a paranormal nature, that what we would say is
Yeah, sure,
paranormal.
of course. Uh, I mean, ghost experiences as well. But when my mother died, well, okay, I was got a phone call from Dr. Vernon Neppy, who was the head of neuropharmacology at University of Washington. And I had worked with him on a book on deja vu that we couldn't sell. I know. He is the number one researcher of deja vu.
Who's this? I need to write this down because I've been searching for this topic. Who is this person?
Oh,
Sorry.
his name is Vernon Neppy,
N
Neppe, MD,
NEPE. And you
PhD.
and you worked on the book with him.
I worked on a proposal. We put it all together, and no one bought it. No one went for it.
Swines.
I know, but I think he wrote a book himself, and it's online. But anyway, at the time, I hadn't seen Vernon for 5 years. At that time, my mother died, and she hadn't died yet. And I hadn't seen Vernon for 5 years. And I got a call from him on the day she died before she died. And he said, Paul, I was reading the newspaper this morning, and I heard a female voice say, call Paul Perry. And I ignored it, and I got back to the sports section, and the voice came to me again, call Paul Perry. So I'm calling you, and I have no reason to know why. I was just told to do that. So I told him about my mom. She had kind of a rapid form of Alzheimer's, and that being a neuropharmacologist, that was a part of his bailiwick, you know. And so he started talking to me about things they had tried with people who were very far along with Alzheimer's. Electroshock therapy was one, different medications. You know, you might try to get a doctor to do one of these, or if she's this far gone, it doesn't matter much anyway. And and then all of a sudden, my phone started beeping with another call, and I said, "Vernon, it's my mom's rest home. I'll call you back." And the nurse comes on and says, "Your mother just died." So to me, that was very much of a shared death experience. I mean, he's told to call me twice. He calls me and he offers as much help as he can at that particular point. So that was one thing that really stuck with me a lot. Um,
I would ask the question, why? Why do you think Vernon had to call you? What was the message behind it?
well, you know, Vernon of all people, for one thing, I hadn't seen him in 5 years. My mother had never even heard of him.
Yeah, so why?
Uh, I don't know, and I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about my mom. And so I don't know. And so in my Occam mind, uh, I think, okay, someone knew I needed help. He got referred to me, but not in time. But I felt like it was a reference call. That's something. Um, but from where I don't know. And I do know that it was a little late.
Mm,
But but I'm with you on that. I mean, someone got a hold of him and I didn't.
mm.
So
I wonder if it's that the path theory again, that little nudge, just another piece added to your experience that pushes you towards the bigger picture somehow. That's all
yeah,
I can think.
yeah.
Mm.
Maybe it was for me. It was not for her, you
Yeah,
know.
that is it's interesting to think of either direction, but maybe it is for you. That it's amazing to think about. Now,
Yeah.
let's look at some of your books.
Yeah.
You've written extensively, as you mentioned, with Raymond. How did your partnership begin?
Uh, I was executive editor of a magazine called American Health Magazine. It was the most successful magazine of the 1980s. And I was living in New York, and we both had the same agent, Nat Sobel. And one day Nat calls me and he says, "Go to lunch with me. I have a proposition for you." And he says, "I have a doctor writer who can't quite pull the trigger on a book." And and I said, "Well, who is it?" And he said, "Well, it's a famous guy, Raymond Moody." And I said, "I have no idea who Raymond Moody is." And Nat says, "Well, he's the guy who named and defined the near-death experience." I said, "I don't know anything about those at all." And he said, "Nat is a tough Jewish agent." And he says to me, "You know, as the editor of a major health magazine, you're not very smart." I said, "Oh, okay."
That's
I
what
didn't.
that was,
Yeah, I
wasn't it? A
know.
slap.
I took it well, and he said, "You really need to know something about this field, and this is the best way to learn something about it. So go see Raymond and see if you can work on this book together." And I did. I mean, he picked me up at the airport, Atlanta airport, and I was expecting. I'd never seen pictures of him or anything, so I expected a guy with kind of a suit on, and driving a Mercedes. And Raymond shows up with a t-shirt on, shorts, and he's got a Toyota Corolla. Okay, so I took a liking to him right away, and we drove out to his house. He was a couple hours from Atlanta. And in the course of that time, in the course of the years I've spent with him since then, he's like the best teacher I've ever had on this and other fields. He's a wonderful guy to talk to. And but we started out with this book called The Light Beyond, and uh, we were writing it. At the end, I said, "Well, there's something missing in this book." And he says, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "We have like one case study of a child who's had a near-death experience. But we need to have people are interested in children having NDEs. Can we get more of those?" And he said, "Well, I don't have any right now, but go see Melvin Morris in Seattle. He just wrote a piece for Journal of Journal of American Pediatrics, I think it is.
That's easy for you to say, yeah.
Yeah, not. Thanks for acknowledging that. And he, as a resident, had encountered a young woman who drowned, almost drowned, and had a near-death experience. Very, very complete near-death experience. Crystal Merzlach. And he wrote a piece about her for the journal. And Raymond said, "Why don't you go see him?" So I did. I went up to Seattle, and we put together this book called Closer to the Light. And in Closer to the Light, I thought there was a big empty spot. And that spot was that how are people transformed? You know, and how many people are transformed, and what is that all about anyway? And so we did this study, the transformation study in Seattle. And then I would go back and forth between Nat and Raymond because I kept finding gaps in the research. And so that's
nice
what
of you. That's nice of you to do that.
yeah. So that's what I like want to confront in a book is the gaps that are in the research.
That's
And
good.
so I'd go back and forth between him and Raymond for a while, and then I started to branch out with other doctors. But
Do you think,
Raymond,
sorry, you carry
I'm
on.
sorry, Raymond has always been preeminent in my mind regarding near-death experiences and just being a really great guy. And we both pushed each other a lot uh, to write our own books and then to do other things. And that's really my debt to Raymond right there, is not being afraid of your own curiosity and not being afraid to ask stupid questions.
So he's driving you, you're helping driving him forward.
Right.
I suppose the question to come out of that is, do you think your partnership, so to speak, was meant to be?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I don't know when you say meant to be, I always go back to this. Meant by who?
Exactly, but I don't know that. But is it a plan? We don't know who wrote the plans.
Right, exactly. And I do think there are those. Uh, yeah, I definitely do, especially in this business, I guess. I guess in this business. You're guided by I am as a writer, guided by my interests. So I went from knowing nothing about NDEs to being extremely interested in them and then just writing my head off. You know, I did a book called Saved by the Light with Danny Brinkley, and
Oh
he
yeah,
was a guy who got struck by lightning,
that's right.
cardiac
Didn't he?
arrest.
Yeah, twice, wasn't it? Was it twice for him?
Yeah, it's even more than that now, and you
Oh,
would think, well, that's not possible. However, I went to visit him in Aiken, Georgia, and no, Aiken, South Carolina. And Aiken's weird because it has like a high point like that. It's like a big hump. And he lives in Aiken, which is kind of at the top of the hump. And he's he's been struck by lightning several times there. Several other people have been struck by lightning. We were sitting on his porch one day, and he was talking about one of his lightning strikes, and these people came by and knew him, and they said, "Hey, did you hear about, Joe? He owns the theater, and he was putting up the new show, and he got struck by lightning and killed." And this is a guy like right around the corner. We had gone to the bookstore at the local mall, and this girl, this woman who was running the cash register, had this up her arm, a red line, and it went all the way up here, up to her neck, and kind of around her ear. And Daniel says, "What?" He's really open. "What happened to you?" And she said, "Well, last night the mall got struck by lightning, and it was a metal mall. It was all made of irons and things. And I was getting into the safe to put the money away, and it's the mall got hit by lightning, and this is what I got from it." And so it's like, everybody in this town has lightning
It's
stories.
time to move, is what it is time for.
That's what I've been saying to him. He moved to Las Vegas, but then he got tired of Vegas and he's now moved back to Aiken. But
Looking for his next hit, literally. Yeah.
yeah, literally. Yeah. But anyway,
Go on.
but I started writing these books because of my really sincere interest in this field. And Raymond really drove that because I was never afraid to ask Raymond a question about something or to bring up thoughts that I had. I kind of came up with the idea for the latest book because I felt like there were a lot of shared death experiences out there that had been ignored, and and so we started talking about it. And then Raymond had a shared death experience with his mother,
Oh, wow.
and and I told him the one that had happened to me with Vernon Neppy and others, and so we started putting together this book that we have out now, which is called Seven Reasons to Believe There is an Afterlife. It's proof of life after life. And we can,
Available, is it available right now?
yes, it's available right now.
Available
And
in all bookstores now. Go and
in
get it.
all
Links in the
Amazons as
description.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
I'm
so
on a
anyway,
commission. No.
but it's so about, what drives a person. Is it a mystical path or is it something else? I don't know. But, I was doing near-death experience books for a long time. And then I heard about a guy in Provincetown, Massachusetts, a guy named Barry Clifford, who had found a pirate ship, and he was excavating the pirate ship, and it was right off the coast, and it was only in like 30 feet of water or so, but that's rough, rough water and cold and sharky, and
Did you say Sharky?
sharky, yeah, yeah. They've
Yeah,
had a
no.
resurgence in the last few years of great white sharks
Oh, God,
all,
sod
all
that.
up and down the Massachusetts coast, and so I thought, well, I want to do that. I'm tired of sitting here writing. And so I got a hold of Barry and I sold a book to HarperCollins called Expedition Witta. In England, it's called The Black Ship, which is a much better title. And it was a pirate ship that was captained by Black Sam Bellamy. And it was a pirate ship, so there's two reasons to call it a black ship. And then it was a former slave ship that he
Yeah,
stole
get it.
from the British. And uh, we I started becoming a treasure hunter.
That's fabulous. Because
It
what
was
what is it
fascinating.
about treasure, right, that drives people? Is it just the search for a missing item? Is it the search for wealth? What was it? What's it for you?
I think it was for me and it was for Barry as well. I didn't want to be a treasure hunter because the treasure hunter buys it and sells it. It buys it, not buys it, finds it. A treasure hunter finds treasure and sells it. And I didn't want that because I think this stuff is too valuable as a witness to history. So that's how Barry felt about it as well. So, he went out there. He's put together a really great system of, finding treasures, trying finding cannons, anchors, uh, 6 pounds of gold sprinkles, gold dust
Yeah, yeah.
on the sea, underwater, buried by sand, and sucking it up in a
In a
vacuum tube.
dredge. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then also, 15,000 pieces of eight, and if not more than that now. And it got his collection got toured by National Geographic and is still on the road today. It's called Real Pirates.
I
It's
do know
still
the
on the
name
road.
Barry Clifford, so it rang a bell with me. So I must have read
Yeah.
about it somewhere.
Well, we did it. We did a documentary for uh, History Channel, and then another one for Discover. Because the other one, okay, Discover Channel did one just on Barry, and and then we went to Madagascar, and we because we were trying to find Captain Kidd's ship.
I must have seen these documentaries because,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, we did that one, and then I got after that I wrote two books with Barry, uh, produced one documentary, and The other one, the Discovery Channel, was produced by some other people. And then I got interested in NDE, near-death experiences again, and shifted back to that. And then I got interested in Christopher Columbus.
And now you're writing a book on that, or did? Yeah.
Well, I didn't do a book. I did a documentary.
Oh, okay.
I'm a knight in Portugal. And I became a knight because I went there to do a documentary film on Salvador Dali and a painting he did for Portugal. There was a painting of the visions of hell that the children at Fatima had. And he did this painting called The Vision of Hell. And, you know, some people in Portugal gave him money to do it. And it completely transformed his art. He went from being the Dali we know and love to going back to spiritual and Christian art, actually. And he did that not toward the end of his life, but the last maybe 20 years, he was doing a lot of that. And I went back and did that. And then I met the Duke of Braganza, who's the man who would be king of Portugal. And this is weird. This is where the path converges and it gets why did this happen? And I met this guy named Jose Lorenta, who used to be in the FBI, and he was now the head of the CSI school at Granada University. And he was granted the right to take DNA from Columbus's grave and see if it was, number one, really Columbus in the grave in Seville, in the tomb, and then who else he was related to, and all the stories about Columbus. And how that could be proven by DNA. So I kind of rejected all these stories until I started talking to the Duke, and the Duke says, "Well, they tested my DNA against Columbus's DNA, and it matches." And so this is from 500 years ago, and it was from he's from the King John line in Portugal. The Duke is. And Columbus was always rumored to be related to royalty,
and there's the proof. Yeah.
And now it's the truth. And then we found out a whole bunch of other things. He's not Italian. He's no one related to him was from Italy. That he was essentially from Upper Portugal, Lower Spain.
Rewriting history is basically what we have to just keep on doing, isn't it? By the signs of
It's
all these
a
investigations.
great documentary, actually.
Yeah.
It's on, you can find it on Amazon. It's
What's it called?
well, they changed it several times, but the secret they called it The Secrets and Lies, but I used to call it Secrets and Mysteries of Christopher Columbus.
Secrets and Mysteries. If I search for Christopher Columbus, I'm sure it'll come up. I've got access
Yeah,
to
you should
Prime,
find
so.
it. It's had like millions of views. And then recently, they came out with all the DNA evidence that I just mentioned, that he's Jewish, and his mother was a woman named Zarco, last name was Zarco, and she was a woman who was essentially a slave to the Duke of Beja, Portugal. So he was, where was he born? He was born out of Portugal, but he lived in Cuba, Portugal, and he named, when he went to the New World, he named the islands after Cuba, because he named Cuba, and that was where he spent a lot of time. And then he named the other islands after towns around Cuba, Portugal. And that, to me, that is stronger evidence than the DNA.
Oh, 100%. Weirdly
Yeah.
enough, I was looking at the map of where Christopher Columbus sailed today. For some reason, it was just showing all his like routes and stuff where he traveled.
Yeah,
Weird how these things sort of like collide.
it is.
I've got a shed load more questions for you, but I know I'm conscious of time that we've got together, so I will punt those to the future if you're amenable to another meeting.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah.
Super, thank you ever so much. But to wrap this up, I think it's time we entered the Koit Zone. Koit Zone! So, Koit Zone, I'm just going to ask you some random, weird questions. Answer best you can. and then we'll wrap up. So let's start with an easy one. What's your favorite movie?
Oh God. Well, Sunset Boulevard is pretty good. Citizen Kane, of course, is good.
Oh, you're
And
going old school, aren't you?
yeah, but they're so good. I mean, they're so clean and well done. Uh, that about does it. Uh,
No, that's cool. We'll move on
yeah,
from that one. What do
yeah.
you drink the most?
Uh, Water.
No, that's
Is that
fair.
what you mean, or you mean
Yeah,
alcohol?
anything. I mean, I've got water in here now. That's not vodka or gin. It's definitely
Oh
water.
yeah, I drink more water than any of the others.
There you go.
Uh,
That is the answer then.
and wine would be Pinot Noir.
That would be number
California.
two. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, who is the funniest of you and Raymond?
Raymond. Raymond? Do you know that he wanted to be a comedian?
I did not know that. No.
Yes, he wanted to be a comedian. He actually has a Raymond Moody album that he did
Of
years
comedy.
ago. Yes, and no one can find it, including Raymond. So I've never heard it. But he has he's got good dry doctor type humor. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you
So
know who he
I haven't
reminds
really
me of?
who?
You know Mickey Rooney. There's a
Oh
bit of
yeah.
Mickey Rooney about him.
Mickey Rooney's awesome. I was watching
Yeah.
one of his movies the other day. What an actor.
Mm.
Yeah.
Got a great face. Makes you want to
Great
smile
face.
with him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what's the worst smell in the world?
The worst smell in the
Yeah.
world was a toilet on the way to Asut, Egypt, where we stopped in a bus. That was the worst smell.
Was
If
it
it's
in the bus or was it just like a out?
no, it was not in the bus. It was in the toilet, in
Oh
this
God.
huge room full of a list line of toilets. But that's not what you're really asking. You're asking for what's the worst readily
Smell.
available smell.
Well, that is readily available if you think about it, sewerage. So if that's what it was in that
Oh, sewage
location,
is, yeah,
that's the answer.
definitely it. A,
Cool.
okay, a dead person.
Have you smelt a dead person? Seriously?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
God.
So it's pretty heavy duty protein.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bacon. How do you like it cooked?
Crispy.
You have joined the ranks of the godly. Well played.
Yeah.
And
They
on
can
that
make
basis,
anything better.
no,
Huh?
it is amazing. Can you cook, by the way?
Oh, yes.
Are you good?
I'm good. Yeah.
Excellent. Have you got your next meal plan in mind, like for later?
Well, actually, I'm going to go shopping here pretty soon. I'm trying to figure out what to buy. Uh,
Bacon.
Definitely. The problem is my wife is semi-vegetarian, so I try to keep my bacon quest outside of the house. But I'll take any idea for dinner tonight. Uh,
Bacon. That's the sum total of my list.
that sounds great to me. In fact, I play pool every week with a friend, and I go to this kind of pool hall at pub not far from here, and I always eat a bacon sandwich. So
Get in. Well played. You've got another tally on the chart. Well played.
yeah, right.
What candy item calls to you to eat shed loads of it?
Oh, caramel.
Oh, aye.
Yeah, caramel with dark
Okay.
chocolate.
And dark chocolate. I tell you what,
And
there's a theory I've got, right, and something for research.
yeah,
Most people interested in the paranormal, I don't know why, but they always like dark chocolate.
isn't that weird?
It is
For a long
weird.
time, I didn't like dark chocolate, and then I started eating it, and I don't like uh, milk chocolate anymore.
Mm.
It's too lightweight.
There's a book there for you.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't know.
any chocolate book is going to
Yeah,
make it.
hell yeah. Um,
Chocolate bacon. There's a
chocolate.
place here, a
Yeah.
French restaurant that sells, and this is a takeout food. They sell crispy bacon dipped in dark chocolate, and you just have a stick of it and take it with you.
What do you think of that?
Awesome.
Really? I don't know if I
You're
would
making
try that.
faces about it. You're making faces.
Yeah, because I'm quite fussy, right? And I like to keep my things separate. So chocolate is
Oh,
chocolate. You can enjoy that. Bacon, I
yeah.
can enjoy that. I don't know if those two merge.
You're still a child. Children like to accept.
You're right.
Yeah, so,
100% truth, by the way.
yeah.
Have you ever owned what most people would call a weird pet? Like a stick insect, that's an example.
Like a stick insect.
Yeah, it could
Like,
be any weird pet. Pets are like dogs, cats, aren't they? Rabbits. Have you
yeah.
ever owned something outside of that?
I went to California when I was probably 19 or 20, and I collected a whole bunch of things from the surf and put them in a big aquarium and brought them back to Arizona and tried to keep them alive. And and it got difficult, but I had these beautiful sea animals from the surf, starfish and little octopus and other stuff. But the water turned bad. It's really hard to do salt water,
Hmm.
keep it from going.
You have to keep it moving, don't you? As well, I'd
You have to
imagine.
keep it moving, then you have to do other things, filtering it, and things like that. And I brought it back to Arizona, and it's too hot here to do that. And that died. That was a weird pet.
That's an octopus is definitely a weird pet. You've again got another tally on the
Yeah,
chart, which
yeah.
leads us to the last Koit Zone question. Are you okay with coming back in a reincarnation sort of way, or would you personally rather get off the ride if we assume that reincarnation is a thing?
I would like to be reincarnated, and then I would also like to be able to remember my past life.
That's the thing, isn't it?
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like that very much.
So you're okay to continue. Fair play. Fair play.
Sure, well, I know this world. I don't know the next. Although I
Although
hear it's,
technically you do.
I do. Well, I hear it's great, and
Yeah.
everyone describes it in the same way. So as being very verdant and pleasant, and the weather's always fine, and uh, yeah. So yeah, yeah. But I'll take a reincarnation. Thank you.
Okay. I'll put your ticket in and see where it takes us.
So,
All right. Thank you ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I definitely like to speak to you again in the future. Hopefully we can correspond offline regarding that. I will
yeah,
say to everyone watching and listening to this, look in the description, links to Paul's sites, etc. Go and buy the books. Go and enjoy all that wonderful information out there, all that time he spent putting that research together. Paul,
sure.
thank you ever so much.
So long.
To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.